Thank you for joining us for our third annual virtual Yom HaShoah commemoration. It is our sacred obligation to remember the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust, to honor our Holocaust survivors, and to remember the heroism and sacrifice of those who liberated our people and the world from brutal tyranny. It is an honor to serve on the JCRC's Holocaust Commission, working with such a dedicated group of community leaders to ensure that the legacies of those lost is carried forward. The JCRC's tireless efforts to promote Holocaust education and commemoration are apparent throughout the greater Washington region. In my own Northern Virginia area alone, the JCRC continues to break new ground in its collaboration with 6 separate school districts, advocating for more substantive and comprehensive Holocaust education and more forceful, innovative responses to school-based anti-Semitism. Many thanks to my Northern Virginia co-chair, Ellen Blaylock, my Holocaust Commission co-chairs from Maryland, Dr. Ron Paul and Albert Bloomfield, JCRC Executive Director Ron Halber, Julie Greenwald, who coordinated today's program, and the entire JCRC staff for their unwavering commitment to this sacred work.
This year's Yom HaShoah commemoration occurs as tragic violence and destruction once again consume the very lands where millions were murdered approximately 80 years ago. We look on in sorrow and grief. Our obligation to remember takes on heightened urgency, knowing that for Ukrainian Jewish Holocaust survivors, this is the second time in their life that they've been forced to confront occupying armies and flee their homes and their country for safety. We understand the painful impact these events have on our Holocaust survivors and their families. In addition, all of this takes place against the backdrop of a worldwide pandemic, now in its second year, that takes a particularly harsh toll on our older, more vulnerable population. Today's generations of students are the last to have the opportunity to meet and hear from a Holocaust survivor. Schools should not delay to bring in survivors in person or virtually. The JCRC has intensified its collaboration with the children and adult grandchildren of survivors who are beginning to assume the mantle of responsibility for carrying on their families' legacies. Earlier this year, we were pleased to launch a new program called Magid, Generations of the Holocaust, which trained children of survivors to compile and share their parents' Holocaust testimonies for public audiences. Participants have already begun in-person speaking engagements in schools, at government agencies, and in interfaith settings. Working together, we will ensure that the mitzvah of remembrance will continue to be fulfilled for generations to come. The death recently of Gerda Weissman-Klein underscores the importance of Holocaust education. Her story of survival was told in 1995 in an Oscar-winning documentary. This was her acceptance speech. Quote, "I have been in a place for 6 incredible years where winning meant a crust of bread and to live another day. Since the blessed day of my liberation, I have asked the question, why am I here? I am no better in my mind's eye. I see those years and days and those who never lived to see the magic of a boring evening at home. On their behalf, I wish to thank you for honoring their memory, and you cannot do it in any better way than when you return to your homes tonight to realize that each of you who know the joy of freedom are winners," unquote. On behalf of the Holocaust Commission and the JCRC leadership and professional staff, I hope you find meaning and comfort in today's program. Thank you to all that have participated. We could not do this without you.
Welcome and blessings to the entire community of Greater Washington as we gather on this day of holy memory. As we honor the deep and abiding lines of connection between our ancestors and us, the victims, the survivors, and the survivors' next generations. And all of us who are here together today in solidarity. Just yesterday, we chanted from Kedoshim in the book of Leviticus, a Torah portion all about infusing this world with holiness, with the fundamental idea that life is holy and precious. As our sages teach us, each life is a whole world. This parasha teaches us, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. This not only is a mitzvah, but a way to honor the holiness in everyone. Today we seek as one community, united, to fulfill this mitzvah in two ways. First, we will bear continuing witness to the brutality of the Holocaust and keep alive the memory of the 6 million, so that this number will always represent real people and their lives, not statistics, not numbers like the ones tattooed on their arms, as we also keep in mind the 5 million non-Jewish victims as well. Lo ta'amod is also a call to us to do what is in our power to ensure that we protect others from the hatred, prejudice, and dehumanization perpetrated against our ancestors. Following the Holocaust, we said, never again. And though we were powerless in genocide after genocide, perhaps we can finally make this hope a reality. So no one else will have to suffer, and we will fulfill the vision of Lo ta'amod, the vision and the mitzvah, to its fullest extent. We share the vision of preventing crimes against humanity through the efforts we make in partnerships within the Jewish community, among religious communities, nonprofits, and other allies with whom we share this vision. Uvechein yehi ratzon, may God strengthen our spirits today, and may the souls of all victims of the Holocaust continue to find safe haven in the sheltering presence of God. And may we live to fulfill the promise of Lo ta'amod, ensuring soon that never again truly means never again, especially now. And we say together, Amen.
We are honored to be led by survivors from our local community, as well as second and third generation survivors and representatives from the Israeli government, in fulfilling the commandment of remembrance through the lighting of 6 candles in honor of the 6 million Jews who perished in the flames of the Shoah. The Jewish people's vibrancy and resilience in the face of destructive evil compels us not only to look to the past in mourning and reverence, but also to look ahead to an even brighter future, committing ourselves to pursuing a world that is less broken with greater justice, compassion, and peace.
Hi, my name is Albert Gary. I was born in France in 1938 and I lived through the war as a hidden child. I spent part of the war in hiding in different places, in a farm at one point, with a family who took us into hiding in their home for 6 months, and in a Catholic boarding school in the summer of 1944 until we were liberated. Today I lit this candle on behalf of the survivor community, my friends who are survivors of the museum and all the survivors in the world.
Good morning. My name is Samuel Ponzak. Dear friends, today we commemorate Yom HaShoah. We commemorate the death of 6 million Jews murdered in Poland and other countries of Europe. The day of commemoration was chosen to coincide with the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in April of 1943. I was born in Warsaw. In winter of 1940, my mother and I escaped with the help of a priest from the area of the future ghetto. We smuggled to the Soviet-occupied part of Poland, and eventually we were all sent to Siberia with my father. After the war, we returned to Poland. There I met Mendel Pasternak, who survived Auschwitz. He used to come visit us in our apartment. He was telling us that a group of Jews which was chosen to be murdered that day were placed in a barbed wire cage. They knew that they will be gassed shortly. They were yelling to the other side, to the Jews outside the cage, tell what they are doing to us. Tell the people what you see. Do not forget us. I remember these words. When I retired, I decided to volunteer at the U.S. Holocaust Museum. I volunteer in translation of documents and memoirs. I am participating in the part that has to do with the do not forget us, remember us. Zachor, remember. These are the words Zachor written on the candle holder that is in front of me.
My name is Frida Pasco, and I'm lighting this candle as a member of the Generations After, one of the sponsoring organizations of this commemoration. Our members are primarily children of survivors and include our cherished survivors and other generations. I am the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors from Poland, Joseph and Nadja Chantal, seen here in this picture. My first and middle names are in memory of both of my grandmothers whom I never knew. My parents were childhood sweethearts and were separated from each other in 1941 when my father was taken away to the Blechemer concentration camp at age 23. My mother was taken away in 1942 to the Reichenbach concentration camp at age 20. They were liberated on April 15, 1945 at Bergen-Belsen by the British soldiers, and shortly afterwards, my father found my mother among the survivors there. They were married in March 1946 in Germany, and we all came to Savannah, Georgia in 1950. Only one brother of each of their families survived, along with a few cousins. And this picture is the only picture I have of either family, of my father's family. My husband, Jeffrey, is here with me. We have a daughter, Razel, who has 3 children, 2 of whom are named for my parents, and a son, Michael, who is named for my father's brother. The continuation of our family is our victory over the hatred during the Holocaust. As I remember my parents and many other survivors, I think of the lessons I learned from them. My parents worked hard in their business and treated people with integrity, dignity, and respect. They built new lives in America and gave our family so much love. I miss them every day. I am proud to light this candle in memory and in honor of all those who perished and all those who survived.
I'm Lou Winarski. I'm here with Fran Winarski Miller, my sister, celebrating a birthday, which is in itself a recognition of a continuum.
We are also honoring the memory of our mother, Susie Bauer Winarski, and her brother Henry Heinz Bauer, who survived the Holocaust, and their parents, Ludwig and Irma Bauer, and their 13-year-old brother, Werner Bauer, all of Mannheim, Germany, who did not survive. They were killed because they were Jews. It's important to remember them as individuals so that they continue to exist.
Even though we never met our grandparents, we never met our uncle, they exist through us. They influence us. We reflect their values, their culture, and they enrich us. As we represent the larger continuum of our people and our Judaism, God bless America, our golden Medina, and our refuge.
Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this world, our own loved ones, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. Let us meditate on the meaning of love and loss and life and death.
Hi, my name is Toby Buloff. I light this candle in honor and memory of my grandmother, Oma Jenny, and my aunt, Helga Miller, and Jenny's cousin, Erwin Pearl, who are the remaining survivors of our family from Vienna, Austria. Thank you.
I'm Elad Stromeyer, spokesperson of the Israeli Embassy in Washington. As a Jew, as an Israeli, and as a descendant of Holocaust survivors, I think it's extremely important to remember and never forget. Lizkor velo lishkoach. I remember my grandparents, born in Austria in Vienna, and remember the stories that my grandmother used to tell me about the wealth her family had when she grew up in Vienna, and how they left everything in 1938 when the Anschluss occurred, left everything behind, all their precious possession, and went to Israel. And there is a moving part in that story of how my grandparents met. They were both from Vienna, but they didn't know one another. They met on the immigration to Israel. They were on the pilgrimage ship, the Colorado, and they started their journey on March 7, 1939, many years before I was born, because I was born on March 7. So today, on this Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, I light this candle in memory of all the Holocaust victims and in honoring of my grandparents, Ami and Michael Stromeyer.
I call on my fellow Holocaust survivors to stand in unity with me as you are able, as we recite the legacy of our survivors. We take this oath. We take it in the shadows of flames whose stunks scar the soul of our people. We vow in the name of our dead parents and children. We vow with our sadness hidden, our faith renewed, we vow we shall never let the sacred memory of our perished 6 million brethren to be forgotten or erased. We saw them hungry, in fear. We saw them in the loneliness of night. We saw them at the threshold of death, true to their faith. We received their silence in silence. We merged their tears with ours. We are the remaining witnesses of deportations, executions, mass graves, death camps, mute prayers, hidden souls, and cries of revolt. The young, the old, the rich and the poor, the ghetto fighters, the partisans, the scholars, and the messianic dreamers, the tradesmen and the businessmen, the Hasidim and Mitnagdim. Like a cloud, we saw them vanish. We take this oath. Vision becomes word to be handed down from father to son, from mother to daughter, handed down from generation to generation. Zachor. Remember what the Nazi murderers and their accomplices did to our Jewish people. Remember them with rage and contempt. Remember what a difference world did to an indifferent world did to us and to itself. We also must remember the good deeds of the righteous Gentiles. In 1981, we took this oath in Israel near the Kotel. There we handed down a legacy to our children in the shadows of the flames of 6 symbolic candles. Tonight at this assembly, we reaffirm our oath in the shadows of the flames of these 6 yahrzeit candles, honoring the memory of 6 million. Achinu b'nei Yisrael, our Jewish brethren. We take this oath. Our memory will become words of history of the Holocaust to be handed down from generation to generation, midor ledor. Unsere Kedoshim, wir wollen keinmal nicht vergessen.
I call on all children of Holocaust survivors to stand in unity with me as you are able, as we recite the Pledge of Acceptance. We, who are your sons and daughters, belong to a generation in which every attempt was made for us to never exist. We, who represent your victory and your triumph over evil of unthinkable dimensions, accept the responsibility to preserve and protect the legacy of the Holocaust. We pledge to commemorate, we pledge to educate, we pledge to forever remember. We pledge to you, our mothers and fathers, who suffered in ways which words cannot describe, that our commitment is an everlasting commitment for this generation and for every generation to come. We dedicate this pledge to our beloved grandmothers and grandfathers who never lived to see us. We dedicate this pledge to our aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, and sisters who are forever missing from our lives. We dedicate this pledge to all the 6 million Jews, men, women, and children who were so brutally murdered, but who will always be in our thoughts and in our hearts.
I call on all grandchildren of Holocaust survivors to stand in unity with me, as you are able, as we recite the Pledge of Continuation. We, who are your grandchildren, will carry on the survivors' legacy to prove to ourselves and to others that we carry on your victory, as well as to memorialize those loved ones who perished in the Holocaust. We pledge to always remember who we are, where we came from, and the traumas our grandparents endured and survived. Educate people of other ethnic, religious, and cultural groups about our grandparents' experiences. Commit to use lessons of the Holocaust to support justice, tolerance, peace, kindness, and compassion, and accept survivors' memories and to pass them on to future generations. We are the last living link to the stories of our grandparents, and by remembering and retelling their stories do we fulfill our obligation to never forget. In a world where anti-Semitism and intolerance persist, where genocide remains an all too present reality, and where curricular changes and challenges often no longer require nor provide opportunities to hear these stories and to never forget, we work to tell our grandparents' stories. We innovate and use social media and podcasts to reach new audiences. We tell their stories of death and destruction, stories of loved ones lost, stories of those who lived lifetimes within a single lifetime, stories of luck, cunning, and humanity, of survival of young men and women against all odds. And we do it again and again with the hope that we can change the world by planting the seeds of memory one at a time. And we multiply, and we endure, and we make sure to never forget.
El male rachamim shochein bameromim hamtzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים לנשמות כל אחינו בני ישראל שנטבחו בשואה אנשים, נשים וטף שנחנקו ושנשרפו ושנהרגו שמסרו נפשם על קידוש השם. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. אנא בעל הרחמים אסתירם וצדק כנפיך לעולמים וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו ושלום על משכבותיהם ונאמר אמן.
Good afternoon. It is my great privilege and pleasure to introduce this year's Yom HaShoah keynote speaker, Holocaust survivor Josie Tromb. Approximately 1.5 million Jewish children perished during the Holocaust. About 6 to 11% of Europe's pre-war Jewish children survived. Thousands of these children endured because they were hidden. Some concealed from the outside world, where discovery would have meant certain death. Some, their Jewish identities disguised, living in plain sight, but at great risk of exposure. All in constant danger and fear, suspended in shadows that would haunt them long after the war had ended. One of these hidden Jewish children was Josie Tromb from Belgium. Today, we are witnesses to Josie, a Holocaust eyewitness, as we remember, mourn, honor, and learn. While the Holocaust uncovered the worst of humanity, it also revealed the human capacity for courage, compassion, and generosity. Many of the Jewish children who survived benefited from the righteous acts of strangers who stood up against tyranny, brutal retaliation, and the stunning silence of indifference. Indifference says it doesn't matter because it's not happening to me. Indifference tells us to stand down, even as the world cries out to us for help. These upstanders who assisted Jews demonstrated the Talmudic teaching that to save a single life is to save the whole world, a world that includes the post-war children and descendants who owe their very existence to their survivor parents and grandparents who lived. Josie lived, and we are all so grateful to be her collective family. Today, we learn from Josie about bravery, resilience, endurance, and hope. Today, we commit to hearing the call that comes in our own time. Today, we commit to standing up for those who are in peril. Thank you, Josie, for reminding us that each of us can and must make a difference. Thank you, Josie, for being our teacher, our conscience, and our inspiration. And now, Josie Tromb.
It is truly an honor to be here and be able to tell my story, and I will right now. First of all, I want to welcome everyone, survivors, families of survivors, and the people in the community, whoever is interested in hearing and listening. I'm going to start by really telling my story. First of all, I do want to say that I am a survivor. However, because I am a survivor and I'm here and I'm alive, it doesn't mean that I did anything heroic or very brave in order to remain alive. I was so fortunate and lucky to have two things that were really on my side. And first of all, let me tell you what I think they were. The fact that I was born in Belgium. Belgium was kinder to its Jews than many other countries in Europe. And so I'm really grateful for that. And the second thing that I'm really grateful for is my mother. My mom really was so brave. And as you'll see in my story, the things she did in order to really be able to save me. Let me start from the beginning, actually. Both my parents were born in Poland. My mother was from Lodz and my father was from Radom. They both came to Belgium as children because both their families decided to leave Poland to have a better life in Belgium. And so both families, although they didn't know each other, both families came to Belgium and grew up there and worked there and made a life for themselves. My parents eventually met and got married, and they married in 1938. They were happy, they had jobs, they were content. And I was born about a year later in 1939. But I was born in March 1939, and as you know, the war actually began in September 1939. So I was only a few months old when the war broke out. Things were happening in Europe, in Belgium, and my parents were very much aware, although people didn't really know what was going to happen. But doom was somehow, in the hindsight, my parents would listen to the radio on a continuous basis, mainly the BBC. And the BBC, the British people were asking men from Europe to come to England and to volunteer to be in the British Army. It was rumored in Belgium in the Jewish community that when Hitler would enter or come into Belgium, he would leave the women and children alone and only arrest the men. My father and mother decided, they listened to the radio continuously, and my dad decided to join the British Army, to go and volunteer. Now, my father was a tailor, and his brother, Ben, my uncle Ben, was also a tailor. They both decided to go to England and to volunteer. They took one of the last ships that crossed the Channel, because, the British were bombing submarines and ships as they were going through the Channel. So my dad's actually was on a ship that was one of the last ships to leave. It was not bombed and was part of the Dunkirk, leaving the entire group that was leaving Dunkirk, although he was not part of the Dunkirk movement. He got to England with his brother, and they went to the British office, the military, to volunteer. And the British looked at these two guys who were both tailors and thought, what can they do with them? And so they put them in a factory making British uniforms, which is incredible, which was probably the safest place for my dad. In the meantime, my mom really didn't know if my dad ever got to England or not, because there was no communication. Once the war started, that was it. Everything was cut off. And my dad and his brother found a place, lived in London, and worked in the factory every single day. My mom and I was only a few months old. My parents, my mother's parents were also living in Brussels, and they were very, very close. And that was really the only outlet I think that my mom had. She was with her mom. My mom, by the way, was also a clothing designer. She had gone to one of these vocational professional schools where you learn how to make patterns and to make all kinds of clothes. And apparently, when the class graduates, which my mom did, the royal family would come to the school and pick out a few students to work in the royal household. Believe it or not, my mom was picked, and she was quite proud of that. And she actually worked in the royal household, fixing clothes, making alterations, and helping the royal family with their clothing. Obviously, that must have been quite a prestigious position. And my mom was really, really proud of that. As time went on, Hitler invaded Belgium May 10th, 1940. He invaded 3 countries, Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. And immediately things really changed. People needed identification cards. In the identification card, it would say whether you were a Jew, it said Juif. And if you were arrested or stopped on the street, you don't know what would happen. You could be shot, you would be deported. And really, people didn't know what would happen. It was very, very frightening, though. People were taken to labor camps and were starting to be deported. There was, my mother was actually, she joined the underground. And by being in the underground, it meant she would deliver messages for meetings and things that were happening, but she also hid some Jewish people in her attic, in the attic where we lived. You know, when Hitler invaded other countries, they arrested the Jews, and Jews would try and flee and try to go to better places. So some of them would come to my mom's apartment. She would hide or keep some of them till they found a safer place. So she was part of the underground movement and helping people, I think, as much as she could. But because of that, she also was able to go to the underground and ask for them to put me in a safe spot. Now, my mother was really fearful that something would happen to me because things were getting very, very difficult in Belgium. And so, indeed, the underground movement, the resistance, actually, one day they picked two women to come to my mom's apartment and to pick me up. And they were going to take me to a place to hide me. And they did come and they picked me up. And of course, I didn't want to go. I was kicking and screaming. I didn't want to leave my mom. And my mom was not allowed to know where they were taking me. It was decided by the underground that parents whose children were being hidden were not allowed to know where the children were being placed because they knew when the Germans would arrest you or take you and interrogate you, eventually, if you knew, it would come out. So parents were not allowed to know where their children were taken. So my mom made the decision of giving me to these two women without knowing where I would go. And which I think is so brave of her. I can't imagine doing that, having children of my own, how one makes that decision, but she did. And luckily she did. And the women took me to Bruges, which is a beautiful little city in Belgium, full of convents and canals. And they took me to a convent full of nuns. And actually, I was there, unbeknownst to me, there were 3 other Jewish children being hidden there. I found this out after the war. And these nuns were actually hiding us. And in the convent, these nuns, by the way, were very, very strict. Um, I don't know if any of you have seen The Sound of Music, but they were wearing these very stiff headgear. And it was amazing. They were very strict. We played in the courtyard, and all I really did was play with the kids and say my rosaries in French. And I could still say it, but it's amazing. But these women were really strict, yet they saved us. They really, really did. One day, apparently, some Germans came to the door and said they wanted to pick up, they had heard that there were Jewish children there. They wanted to pick up the Jewish children and take them away. The nuns actually said to them, you know, they're not ready yet. We have to pack their clothes, and why don't you come tomorrow? So indeed, the Germans left and came back the next day. But in the meantime, the nuns during the night actually smuggled us out and took us back to Brussels, which is where I was originally from. And they placed me with a Catholic family, a mother, a father, and a little girl my age. And the father, by the way, was also part of the underground. They weren't Jewish, they were Christian, but he felt very strongly he was part of the underground. Um, you know, in Belgium, as in many other countries in Europe, food was rationed. There was very little food to go around. And they, of course, I was there illegally. I was a non-entity there. And so they got food for 3 people. There were 3 of them, but they shared everything with me. The man would often be taken out at night for interrogation. He would come back in the morning, really black and blue, but he never told on me. And they saved me. They really did. My mom, in the meantime, once I was actually taken, luckily, it was after I was taken, my mom was deported. She was arrested. And she was taken with her mother to Malines, which was a transit camp. The Belgium, the Germans would put people in a transit camp, Malines, and they would stay there a few weeks till the next train would take people. And actually, all the Jews who were deported from Belgium were all taken to Auschwitz, not to any other camps, but to Auschwitz. So my mom and her mother were both taken to Auschwitz after being in Malines for several weeks. They were taken to Auschwitz, and once they got to Auschwitz, it was a selection. They got off the train, and immediately they parted the people. They put them in 2 sections. One, the young people would be taken. See, Auschwitz had a labor camp called Birkenau, where they actually made ammunition. And the young people and the able people would be put in one line, and the elderly would be put on another line. Now, my mother and her mother were separated immediately. They probably thought my grandma was too old to work. She must have been 50 years old. And so they separated them. And my mother actually went back to stand with her mother. And the German really swiped her, hit her, and said, "You go where you're told." And she actually never saw her mother again. My mother, which is incredible to me, my mother survived. She survived Auschwitz. She was actually, she was freed she was first taken on a death march. The Germans, once they saw the Allies approaching and nearing the camps, or where the Germans were, they started actually emptying the camps and put people on a death march, walking back towards Germany, where they still had some labor camps and could still use some of the prisoners for work. So my mother was put on a death march. She was on that march from January till April, which to me is, again, it's incredible that she was able to survive. She was freed. It was the last battle between the Germans and the Russians at the Elbe River. And when she was freed there, when she was liberated, the Red Cross was actually the Russians took her to the Red Cross along with all the other prisoners, and they were taken to a hospital and treated. My mom was quite a sick person when she was liberated. She had typhus and meningitis, and she was treated at the hospital. And once she got a little better, the Red Cross actually took her back to Belgium, took her back to Brussels. I didn't mention my mom had 2 sisters who were all by the way, they were all hidden by the church. So they were safe in the church. One of my aunts, one of my mom's sisters, the older one, had 3 sons. They were a little bit older than me, and they were all actually in churches. So once the war ended in Belgium, the war ended earlier. Different countries were freed at different times, and Belgium was liberated in 1944. So once it was liberated, my 2 aunts came looking for me. There was a network of the underground where people were looking for each other. They could find each other. Names were posted all over. And my aunts, the 2 of them, found me. At this family where I was staying, they actually found me and took me home. And of course, that was wonderful. I went to my aunt's home, my aunt Therese, who has 3 sons, and they treated me like their little mascot. It was wonderful. They spoiled me, and it was great being with family. In the meantime, my mom actually came back to Brussels. The Red Cross brought her in the first place. She was to her sister's apartment, and she knocked on the door. There I was. So we were reunited, uh, which is incredible because not many people, not many families were reunited. And luckily, my father eventually came back to Belgium also. While he was in London, his house was bombed. They had a lot of bombing, blitzkrieg from the Germans. So his house where he was living was bombed, and he spent 2 years in a hospital. He was injured quite badly. He was cut, I think his whole body. So he came back to Belgium, and I actually didn't see him until I was 6 years old. And he had left when I was 13 months old. So I really didn't know who he was. All I remember is going to the ship at the dock when my dad went down the steps and my mom says, "There's your father." And I had no idea who he was. But you can imagine, 3 people being put together again, going through totally different experiences and difficult experiences. So it was hard. It was hard, I think, for all of us. It was hard for my mom, and for my dad, and for me. I was just a kid, just kind of taking it all in and probably not understanding very much. Um, my parents decided they wanted to leave Europe. They really felt too much had happened there. By the way, my grandfather, my mother's father, had also been taken to Auschwitz, and he actually died on the train before he even got to Auschwitz. He really was treated very, very badly. When he was in Malin, the transit camp, things were very, very difficult for him. He was a religious man. He was like the mashgiach in the synagogue. And my grandmother was actually she was in charge of the Chevra Kadisha, which is the organization that takes care of deaths in the community of Jewish people. So both of them really died. They were murdered, and my mother and father really felt they had to leave Europe. They couldn't live there anymore. Um, we applied for visas. It took about 4 years till after the war. And my parents, eventually we came to the States in 1949. I was 10 years old. And, I went to Patterson. We settled in Patterson, New Jersey. Why Patterson? Um, my mom had an elderly aunt there, and you go where you usually have a relative. So we went to Paterson, New Jersey. We lived with my aunt, my mom's aunt, for about a month till my parents got work and an apartment, and then we left and we're on our own. And we've been here ever since, and we're very lucky and very grateful to the fact that we were able to come here and live here in freedom. I think I am so lucky and happy to be here. Um, my story is also one of much love and people who really went out of their way to help me. If people hadn't helped me, I wouldn't be here today. And when I think every person can actually do something to help a person, no matter what. And after I speak to people about my story, my life, I usually finish with a quote, which I think is very meaningful to me. And I'm sure you've probably heard it, and I'll read it to you now, if I can find it. Yes, it's a quote by Martin Niemöller, who was a minister, a Lutheran minister. He was very, very much for Hitler at the beginning of the war, because, Hitler promised wonderful things, work and food and to be a proud nation again. But when he saw what Hitler was doing, he was really, really angered, and he was actually against him, and he was actually put in jail. He was in prison. He didn't die in prison, though. He was freed later on. But here is his quote, and if I may read it, I will. First, they came for the socialists. I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews. I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me. There was no one left to speak for me. And I think this is very, very telling and very, very true. You have to speak out for your fellow man. You have to.
Tata mi kaže nemoj govoriti, samo sviraj harmoniku, sviraj harmoniku i pjesme pjeva. Tata mi kaže nemoj govoriti, samo sviraj harmoniku, sviraj harmoniku i pjesme pjeva. Ne znam zašto bježim, pa šta sam učinila. Samo sviram harmoniku, sviram harmoniku i pjesme pjeva. Moja mila majka Samaye ostala Aya sfiram harmoniku Sfiram harmoniku Suze li
Yitgadal,
Auschwitz,
V'yitkadash,
Lodz,
Shemei Rabbah,
Ponar,
Be'alma Divra Kirutei,
Babi Yar,
V'yamlich Malchutei,
Majdanek,
B'chayechon, Uvyomechon,
Birkenau,
Uvchaye Dechol Beit Yisrael,
Kovno,
Ba'agala, Ubizman Kariv,
Yanowska,
V'yimeru,
Amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shemei Rabbah Mevorach Leolam Ulalmei Almaya,
Yitbarach V'yishtabach,
Theresienstadt,
V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam,
Buchenwald,
V'yitnaseh V'yithadar,
Treblinka,
V'yit'aleh V'yithalal,
Vilna,
Shemei Dekudsha,
Bergen-Belsen,
Barichu Le'ela,
Mauthausen,
Min Kol Birchata V'shirata,
Dachau,
Tushbechata V'nechamata,
Minsk,
Da'amiran B'alma,
Warsaw,
V'imeru, Amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chaim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, V'imeru, Amen.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom B'mromav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom, Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, V'imeru, Amen.
The partisan song. Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Chod Himmeln bleien a verstehlen neue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird der Point und unser Trott mir seinen Do. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird der Point und unser Trott mir seinen Do. Von grünen Palmenland bis weißem Land von Schnee. Wir kommen on mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und wo gefallen ist, spritz von unser Blut. Sprotzen wird dort unser Wure, unser Mut. Und wo gefallen ist, spritz von unser Blut. Sprotzen wird dort unser Wure, unser Mut. Es wird die Morgens im Begilden ans dem Heind. Und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Nur euch versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajur. Wie Apparosel gehen das Lied von dort zu dort. Nur euch versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajur. Wie Apparosel gehen das Lied von dort zu dort. Das Lied geschrieben ist mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Liedl von der Fegel läuft frei. Das hat der Volks erwischen, weil ein dicke Wind. Das Lied gesungen mit ner Ganes in die Hand. Das hat der Volks erwischen, weil ein dicke Wind. Das Lied gesungen mit ner Ganes in die Hand. Don't ever say that you're on your final way. Those skies of lead will obscure the sunny days. The hour we've waited for so long is drawing near. When our steps will thunder out, we are here.
My name is Ron Halbert, and it is my privilege and honor to serve as the Executive Director of the JCRC of Greater Washington. The JCRC has organized our community-wide Yom HaShoah commemoration for decades. It is a sacred responsibility. Putting together a meaningful and commemorative program of this size and scope involves a steadfast commitment of so many organizations and individuals. First, thank you to our keynote speaker, Josie Tromb, for sharing her personal, harrowing Holocaust experience with our community. Thank you to all of our survivors, their children and grandchildren for participating in our commemoration. My gratitude to the many members and organizations represented on the Holocaust Commission who met throughout the year to develop such a meaningful program. Thank you to the Commission's co-chairs, Ron Paul, who is also JCRC's president, Ellen Blaylock, Albert Bloomfield, and Ira Bartfield for their leadership and guidance. I also want to thank our 3 JCCs and Leisure World for their extraordinary efforts to distribute thousands of yellow candles throughout the region so we can commemorate as a united Jewish community. I also want to express my gratitude to our 2 co-sponsoring synagogues, Shari Shalom and its leader, Rabbi Neil Toe, and to Shari Torah and the rabbinical team of Rabbi Annie Lewis and Yosef Goldman. Thank you to the clergy, musicians, and speakers whose efforts made this commemoration rich in content and meaning. We are honored to co-sponsor with 3GDC, an organization of grandchildren of survivors, Yom HaShoah program at 6th and I. We are also deeply appreciative that local legislative bodies have passed resolutions commemorating Yom HaShoah. This includes the Montgomery County Council, the DC Council, the boards of supervisors in Fairfax, Loudoun, and Arlington County, and the city of Alexandria. I also want to thank JCRC staff, in particular, Julie Greenwald, who led our professional team to make today's program a successful reality. And thank you to all of our donors who provided the necessary resources to make this day of commemoration possible. Today is the day when we gather as a community to honor and remember the 6 million Jews who were killed by the Nazis for only one reason: they were Jews. And while we would love to believe that combating anti-Semitism, racism, and bigotry is a thing of the past, we know that is not the case. We are keenly aware that in recent years, hate crimes have dramatically increased throughout the United States and in our region. Jews are the most targeted religious minority in America today. So our efforts to educate others about the dangers of all forms of bigotry and to protect the Jewish people and all people are ongoing throughout the year. We bring survivors from our Speakers Bureau to local schools to speak to thousands of students about their lives and the importance of combating hatred. We train our young leaders to educate their peers about what it means to be a Jewish teenager today as part of our student-to-student program. We fight anti-Semitism and bigotry in our schools and communities. We lobby in 3 jurisdictions to increase Holocaust education, secure government funding for the agencies that provide critical services for Washington area survivors, and for security dollars to protect our Jewish institutions. We maintain strong relationships with our fellow Jewish organizations, law enforcement authorities, and interfaith partners. Despite more than 2 years of challenge, physical distance, and growing societal bigotry, our community is still strong, united, and optimistic about our future. Therefore, it is fitting that we conclude our Yom HaShoah commemoration on an optimistic note with the singing of Israel's national anthem, Hatikva. Thank you for joining us.
Nefesh Yehudi Homiya Ufatei Mizrach Kadima Ayin Letzion Sophia Od Lovda Tikvateinu Hatikva B'Shnot Habayim Liotam Chofshi Be'artzeinu Eretz Zion B'Yerushalayim Liotam Chofshi